so it is with the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
In your heart, you know he's right.
I hear there's rumors on the internets.
And good morning, Wilmington. Hello and welcome to Big Talker Mornings. I'm your host today, Yaël Ossowski, rounding out my portion of the hosting week. It's been great to be on the radio the last day. You heard me yesterday. We had some great interviews. We had great spots, great analysis, and it was only the beginning, and we're starting once more. It's a beautiful day in Wilmington, North Carolina. It's going to be a high of 75 degrees, plenty of sun, and it's going to turn a bit nasty on the weekend, so that rain that the rest of the country's been getting will be coming to Wilmington, and that'll spoil things. But for the moment, we'll enjoy the sunshine. We'll enjoy how nice it is. Thank you for joining us early this morning. We've got an action-packed show. We're here for 3 hours on the morning program. Perhaps you're firing up the truck to get into work. Perhaps you're putting the kids off into school. And perhaps you're ready for another day at the office. We're glad that you're tuned in here. We've got plenty to cover in terms of news and analysis and interviews. We're going to have a few people on to discuss what's happening, everything related to climate change and the COP summit in Glasgow, Scotland. We're going to be speaking with Connor Tomlinson. He is a fellow who is from the British Conservation Alliance. He's following all things Britain and UK, but gives us a good global perspective as to what's happening with all these billions and trillions of dollars that are being pledged in your name, ladies and gentlemen. So Connor's going to give us that insight. We'll also speak with Eric Peterson. He's from the Pelican Institute down there in Nolens. And we talk about all things internet, all things broadband, and what the plans of the Biden administration are, specifically when it comes to all of the different packages and recovery and infrastructure bills. There's a lot of stuff in there, guys. I think it would probably take about a month and a half if we did 3 hours a day on just what was in these infrastructure bills and what was in the larger package. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in D.C., a lot of lobbyists that have their hands on the pie. We're here to try to give some perspective, so Eric will be able to do that. And we might have a surprise interview that we'll put in at the latter part of the show. You guys might enjoy that. It does feature someone that you've heard on Big Talker from time to time. Usually is behind the board, behind all the technology that runs the station. But we're going to have a little tete-a-tete with our dear own engineer and producer behind the scenes, TK Turbo. That'd be kind of fun. As we mentioned yesterday, today is Election Day here in the Wilmington area, New Hanover County, Brunswick County. There's a mayoral elections, city council elections. Yesterday, we were able to speak to Jonathan Uskageti, who discussed all the things that are happening in Wilmington and for the city council, sort of his platform and what he would like to pursue. A lot of talk about law and order, perhaps redoing some zoning, allowing more buildings to be built, and some better plans up there by the central planners in Wilmington. Definitely something that many of our listeners are interested in. We do have a lot of construction segments throughout the week. We've got a lot of great hosts. And that's another thing I forgot to mention yesterday. Big Talker does have a slew of local hosts that are on every single week. Particularly on Monday, last night, if you guys were listening at 6 p.m., we had Signal Fire Radio. A great group of guys putting together amazing content each and every week. Just great stories, from the veteran life and transitioning back into civilian life after the military. They have a great commentary and some laughs. I mean, it seems like a friend group you want to hang out with. Tonight, we'll have All Things Brunswick at 6 p.m. That's our local content. Apart from all of the other shows that are syndicated after this program, if you guys know, we'll have the Mike Gallagher Show. The brand new Clay, Travis, and Buck Sexton Show is at noon. We have Dana Lash, who's on at 3 p.m. Larry Elder will be on tonight at 7 p.m. And good old Dave Ramsey, making sure that you're not spending more than you have and that you also have a PhD in DUNB. He's on at 10 p.m. And throughout the week, we also have great local commentary and local shows. Recovering Hope is on Wednesday, hosted by Mark Markley. That's at 6 p.m. Wednesday. He always has some great, insightful interviews. He's been really diving into COVID and all of the different various alternative treatments and the treatment of doctors, the treatment of nurses, and the treatment of health practitioners who don't necessarily follow the status quo. So he's been doing a lot of that. Thursday, 6 p.m., another local show produced here at the Big Talker, Objection to the Form. This one is a kind of great legal program. Justin Humphreys from the Humphreys Law Firm gives us his take on the legal news of the week and all things that are important when it comes to the law. And there's a lot of different things that are happening throughout the area, and he always provides very good analysis. My name is Yaël Ossowski, as I mentioned earlier. You can normally hear me Saturdays at 10 a.m. on Consumer Choice Radio with my co-host David Clement. And we've got a great slew of guests for our program on Saturday. I won't spoil it right now because I want you guys to stay tuned. We'll have plenty more to come on that. So what's been happening in the news the last day, folks? Seems as if the CDC is expected to sign off the vaccine for the COVID-19 for children aged 5 to 11. So it hasn't happened just yet, but they're right on the brink. And since all of the people who are working there are apparently talking to journalists saying it's definitely going to happen, we can expect it's going to happen. Now, some of you might be hesitant to get the vaccine, or perhaps you already have and you're enthusiastic and you're safe and you're fine. Regardless, we have a solution to many of these things. We don't necessarily need to have all of these lockdowns again. Having the vaccine for children, I think, is going to be a whole other Pandora's box. People are going to be very surprised because there are going to be a lot of people who were very in favor of vaccines, particularly for adults or even those that are above 12. But they're going to have another thing coming when we start talking about vaccinating children, particularly when it comes to COVID, looking at the numbers, looking at how many have actually gotten gravely ill or have unfortunately passed away compared to the larger number. There's a lot of that's going to be debated. We won't do it here on this program because we want to stick it to the news of the day that is not COVID related, thankfully. We only mentioned it yesterday, I think, by hour 3. So I think we did a pretty good job. We didn't have to dive too deep into what's happening, everything related to COVID, to vaccines, to lockdowns. We've covered that a lot on this morning program, and would have a great time doing it because I think there's a lot of great analysis and debate that you don't necessarily hear coming from the CDC and from Fauci and all of the rest. So as I mentioned, Election Day, one election that a lot of people are focusing on is the governorship, the gubernatorial race up there in Virginia, just north of us. And this has been a really contentious affair. Accusations of racism, basically saying that Trump is supposed to be flying in, doing rallies when he's not. Really just nasty, nasty affair. We have Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic candidate. He was former governor some years ago. He's running again after Ralph Northam is done with his duty as the governor, who had his own little blackface scandal, if we remember, but was able to stay in office. And the Republican challenger for governor in Virginia is Glenn Youngkin. And this stuff has been really animated. I mean, you can tell in the national media that they talk about it a lot because a lot of political journalists live in D.C. or they live in Virginia, right up there in the Nova area, so just right outside of D.C. So they're always going to talk about it a bit more, much like we hear about New York politics all the time when it comes to the journalists based in New York. But this one has been a really contentious one. I mean, the polls that have been averaging basically dead heats forever. I mean, I'm looking at the latest average. This morning, we're on election morning, and it is Youngkin up 48.5 to McAuliffe 46.8. So that's a spread of 1.7, well within a margin of error. And this has been more fascinating because McAuliffe, the Democrat, basically has had the lead the entire time. If we go all the way back to August after the primaries, McAuliffe has had a pretty healthy lead, and it's tightened up in about the last month or so. And that really has to do with, perhaps it's the flavor of what's happening in national politics, but I think it has a lot more to do with locally and civically. A lot of people are very upset about education. They're upset about things like critical race theory and whether or not it is in schools, what it is teaching children. And we're seeing that there's an entire uproar that's happening across the country on these issues, not just in Virginia, but we could see the same effects in Wilmington. With a lot of the Wilmington races, we've heard a little bit about what's happening with law and order and the police, but there has been a lot of talk and a lot of analysis about critical race theory, about leftist politics in general, and there have been a lot of activists who've been very loud about this election. And I know that they've tried to make an influence. Perhaps it has swayed you, or perhaps you've stayed true to whomever you wanted to vote for. Regardless, if you have not gotten out there, do check your local polling place, go to the website, check it out, go to your lunch break, go sometime today. If you have not already sent in your ballot, you have the ability to engage locally, folks. These are the people who fix or don't fix your potholes. These are the people who lead a lot of the money that your local property taxes that you're funding for a lot of projects that are happening. And Wilmington is booming as ever. And we know that from all the population figures. We know that from the construction industry, which we hear a lot about on this station. And more is going to be coming. So get out there, get your vote on, see what you can change, and then we can all complain about it here in a couple months. Call into the station, and we'll talk about it. So we're starting off on a very, very good foot here on Big Talker Mornings. I'm your host, Yaël Ossowski, this morning. We're going to have a great slew of programming all day long, 3 hours straight. Continue listening here. We're also on the YouTube, we're on Facebook, and we are streaming live on the apps all morning long. So stay tuned. We'll be right back here on Big Talker Mornings. Don't touch that dial. And welcome back to Big Talker Mornings here in Wilmington, North Carolina on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. Yaël Ossowski hosting for this morning. A couple things that we want to cover for the rest of the morning. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Beautiful sunshine for the rest of the day. I know you guys are going to be having a great time. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening with climate change and global conventions. I think this is a big one because while we're talking about something that's kind of happening far away, it's over there in Glasgow and Edinburgh. They have the COP26 meetings. This is sort of the UN affair where all the major heads of state come together and try to find some agreement for exactly how they would like to regulate emissions and taxes and basically restrictions on your life. And obviously there's the predictable affair of the billionaires and the heads of state all flying in on their private jets. This happens every single time. I think it's every 4 years. I think it's Jeff Bezos that was coming in on a $48 or I think $60 million Gulfstream. Apparently there are 400 private jets that are going to go to COP26, including the Prince Albert of Monaco, all types of green CEOs, and apparently there's a whole line, 30 miles worth of planes that they're trying to land up there. All the more interesting because in many of these restrictions that they're going to come up with throughout this entire event are things that are going to predicate on restricting things in your life, your ability to get on a plane and travel to go on vacation or to go to see family. And there'll be fuel surcharges. They'll try to regulate that. They'll try to make it so that it becomes more expensive to even drive, so that gasoline taxes might go even higher. The Daily Mail over there in the UK, I mean, they're great for great sensationalism and tabloidism, right? They got a great map showing where all the private jets are coming from. Just in a little spot of time on Sunday, there were 52 private jets that flew in from all over. You had the Kenyans, you had Moscow, you had a lot of Middle Eastern leaders, a lot of the European leaders flying in, a couple African leaders as well. All the private jets flying in, making sure they can talk about climate change. There's been a couple of jokes about that on South Park. I don't have to talk more about it. But the video that we're seeing this morning, this one is a good one. It's actually showing our President Joe Biden listening to, the opening of the convention and nodding off to sleep. I mean, there's a couple of things that, you might not like Trump for. But the Sleepy Joe meme and moniker, it kind of sticks. I think it was the Dilbert creator Scott Adams, how he talked about how many of these things that Trump would say or do would end up in very big confirmation bias. So he would say something like Sleepy Joe, and everyone would be like, what's that about? And then there'd be some instance or some event where Joe Biden would be sleeping or nodding off, and it's like, oh, it seems to confirm that analysis. So that seems to, I'm sure Joe Biden is a bit bored at what's happening there. It's a lot of virtue signaling. The virtue signaling aspect of all of this is probably the hardest to stomach, because while all of these people are jetting into Glasgow to the climate change conference and talking about how we need to drive less and fly less and all of this, many of you are hard at work. You punched in your card this morning. You put in gasoline in your car so you could get there, and you're going to go pick up your kids. You're going to go to the store later, pick up some items that your family would need, and you need to do that. And they're going to make that a bit more expensive for you. Now, do I think a lot of these people have very good intentions? Perhaps. They might have the best of intentions. I don't think we can ascribe the worst intentions to them. For them, it's all about saving the planet, and saving the planet means that we need to restrict progress. We need to restrict any kind of combustibles so that we can have a cleaner planet that is free of carbon dioxide. But carbon dioxide is not the only thing. We saw from this morning, there's actually a new mandate that's coming out from the Biden administration on methane. So methane, a byproduct of many different things that are happening in factories and farming and all of the rest. Apparently, methane emissions, which are a part of global anthropogenic climate change. Apparently, what we've seen is that 30% of all methane emissions are attributable to the oil and gas industry. So that's production, that's pipelines, and all of the rest. And the EPA is proposing a rule that's really going to go back and look at every single pipe throughout the country, every single facility, and really the idea is that they're trying to reduce methane by 30% by the end of the decade. So really, that would mean just basically deleting the oil and gas industry, which sounds good in rhetoric, but for the average person who uses a car, heats their home, so many other things, yeah, that's not going to be a good thing. It means prices are going to go way up. It means you're going to have less choice, and it's definitely going to make your life a bit harder. So I think while everyone can lavish praise upon those who take up the banner of climate change, we have to think about the impact on ordinary working people. Geez, I sound like Bernie Sanders now, don't I? Ordinary working people. That's exactly what's going to happen if we have too many of these centralized initiatives that try to curb all the different emissions. And, we're not even talking about the actual solution to all of these issues or problems, and that's technological progress. So if technological progress is awaiting us, shouldn't we do everything in our power to unleash that? And to make sure that we are allowing the next replacement for oil and gas and any of these other technologies to come up? Because as far as I'm seeing, the only person who is elevating himself above that and has become the richest person, Elon Musk, he's like one of the most hated figures, even though he single-handedly is doing more to, quote, decarbonize the economy than certainly any of the politicians. But that's the thing that they don't like, and it's a United Nations thing. What they do not like is they do not like free enterprise. They do not like open exchange. They do not like when private solutions are offered in the marketplace to problems that they themselves caused. Because they would very much like to be the cause and to provide the solution. We see the same thing with the vaping debates, if you guys have ever seen that. Vaping electronic cigarettes, vaping devices, they're readily available in many stores now. But relentlessly, the past 5 or 6 years, there have been campaigns by nonprofit groups, health groups, governments to restrict access to these vaping devices. And many former smokers have totally quit by using these. And they've done so because these are private innovations that have come out of the market. And yeah, greedy companies have been selling these products to people. And people have been getting away from traditional cigarettes. I think that's something to celebrate, but you can find almost no health group, at least in the United States, that actually praises that. They would like to see an abstinence-only approach. They want to see, I guess, the patches made by pharmaceutical companies. I'm not exactly sure their aim, but they definitely don't like vaping because they're trying to restrict it everywhere. State of New York, state of Oregon, state of Virginia, all these places are moving to restrict some type of vaping flavors. Massachusetts was the first one that jumped off, and that led to, what did it lead to? A lot of people buying their products out of state. So it's this kind of stuff to where we have the solutions in the market, and those who are actually preventing progress are those who are in government or those who are basically trying to lobby the government to have more restrictions. So just imagine what it would be for climate change, for energy, for the environment. What kind of change are we not seeing because we're focusing on all these global compacts to reduce or basically increase the price of how much your gasoline will be at the end of the week? The idea is that you'll maybe drive less if it's more expensive, but as many of you know, we're not all joyriding on Sunday. Many of us get into our cars and we go to work, we pick up our kids, we drop them off, we go see family, we go shopping, and we come home. We don't all take California road trips every weekend, everybody. The idea that you're supposed to penalize those who are working people so that they use less, that's not what it's about. The answer is always and has always been technological progress. Let the economy grow. Let the different companies compete, provide better solutions. Maybe it will be a Tesla. Maybe it'll be a hydrogen car. I don't know. But let the market decide that, rather than just trying to price everyone out of being able to pay for their gasoline at the end of the month. Because the people who will not be able to afford any of the restrictions or taxes that they put up in Glasgow or they talk about in DC, it's going to end up being you. And you're going to have less disposable income at the end of the month. And what did that solve and what did that achieve? It just made your life harder. Are you greener? Not necessarily. You're doing exactly the same thing. But we all have incentives that are in front of us. And if those incentives are warped and all of a sudden we have less money available at the end of the month, I'm pretty sure everybody's going to be buying cheaper products. People are going to be buying things, made from China or maybe all these other areas because it costs less. And you can't have a system in which people are working, they're scraping together their money, and day by day government makes things more expensive, either by taxes or by restrictions, or, let's not forget to mention, tariffs and global trade. Global trade is actually something that has allowed the middle class to rise up. It's allowed working people to rise up. I don't think that's said enough, particularly in our society, because there's been so much demonization of trade. Trade is something that is only free exchange across borders. You're free to buy domestic products, but a lot of companies that are based here domestically also rely on source material from other parts of the world. There's a whole other defense of free trade we could do this morning. We have many more to come throughout the rest of the morning. Great interviews coming up in segment number 5 through 8 and hour number 2. But keep going, keep listening to The Big Talker. We'll be right back after these messages. Big Talker in the mornings, Yaël Ossowski on the mic. Big Talker mornings. Here in the Big Talker 106.7 FM, Yaël Ossowski here at the mic, providing you commentary, analysis, and interviews all morning long, all 3 hours. You guys can always listen to our program at bigtalkerfm.com. You can also listen to the apps available both in the App Store and the Android Store. And we've also got that stream going on YouTube, on Facebook, and trying to put up one on Twitter. So if you guys are on any of those platforms or want to tune in, add some comments, we can respond in real time. So if you're angry, you don't like what's happening, you don't like what I'm saying, you got the opportunity to say something. Those of you who are listening on the radio, be sure you're driving in a straight line. Keep your hands on the wheel, folks. It's going to be a great morning. A couple things that we want to get into before our guest. We're going to have a couple of guests in the next hour. discussing all things climate change, as we mentioned before, but also broadband internet, taxation, infrastructure plans. You guys know the gamut of regulation that's happening. We want to stick to a bit North Carolina news now. There's an article here from yesterday in the News and Observer up there in Raleigh. Apparently, the North Carolina House Democrats have walked out on the newest Republican member, who they say participated in the January 6th insurrection. Let's read from the article here. North Carolina House Democrats walked out of Monday night's session before Republican Donnie Loftus was sworn in as the chamber's newest member. The Gaston County Republican Party selected Loftus, a 30-year Army veteran and former county commissioner, to complete the term of Representative Dana Bumgardner, who died in October. Democrats, in walking out, were objecting to Loftus because of his participation in protests at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, protests that devolved into a violent riot. Those are the words of the News and Observer. Loftus posted on social media that he had gotten gassed 3 times and was at the entrance when they breached the door. Quote, "My oath of enlistment has the phrase both foreign and domestic. We didn't think it would actually be domestic," Loftus wrote in a now-deleted Facebook post. Loftus told WRAL in late October, after being selected for the House, that his involvement was strictly peaceful. Quote, "I had absolutely zero involvement in the rioting and categorically condemned the storming of our Capitol building that day," he told the station. Loftus, a Bronze Star recipient, declined requests from an interview from reporters after his swearing in. So apparently the House Democrats are not too happy there with Loftus. Now, if it is true that he was there on January 6th, I don't really know what to make of that. Do you? Kind of strange. There were a lot of people there, guys. There's been a good number of state representatives who were there. There's a lot of local administrative officials from various states who were there as well. I've been very clear on what happened on January 6th. I wrote an article right after it happened. I saw that as pretty destructive, and I did not like what I was seeing. I didn't like the idea that people had gotten in no matter how, whether they're invited in or they stormed in or, threw down the barricades. Not a good look. Not a good look for a republic to have people storming the halls of the legislative halls. That's not, I think, a good look for our republic in the 21st century. People were mad, obviously, about the election, and there's all kinds of things that were being done and lawsuits and planned, and Trump did play a hand in that. I think at the time he likely should have been impeached, probably removed from office. Not that he was that effective anyway in the last few days before Joe Biden would take over. But the more that we're learning about this, the more that we see that, it's going to be a very complex affair. I know that Fox News has a new documentary out on January 6th. I'm not sure of the evidence that they've presented in there. But we do know from the reporting of Glenn Greenwald, who is a reporter, founder of The Intercept, former blogger at The Guardian, now has his own Substack page. There were a good number of FBI informants who were somewhat involved. We don't know at which level. We don't know if it rose to instigation. But we know that there were many there. And maybe it got out of hand. Perhaps it was bigger than they had even thought. Or perhaps all it took was one door being knocked down and everyone else going in. I mean, the videos of people inside were not, people running around, trashing everything, lighting it on fire. But still, it happened. And with the halls of the Capitol being breached like that, again, this is not exactly the best look that we want to have for the United States. That's usually something that happens in a banana republic, usually in some dictatorial regime where the leader, the dictator, is killed in some scuffle, and then the ordinary townspeople go in and seize the halls of power. There's a lot of reasons to be angry with government. Plenty of them. I've been to protest. I've been involved in them. I've tried to lobby government against things I don't like. I've spoken out about it, written about it, done videos, done speeches. Haven't yet stormed the Capitol, though. Not on the top of my list. Just not a very effective thing, if you ask me. what are you hoping to gain? Because no matter what's going to happen, our politics now is so tribal, so weaponized, that we know that there are going to be all types of commissions and queries and legislative councils that are going to go investigate exactly what happened, and they're going to carry this stuff out and drag it on for a long, long time. And maybe it's true that they should. We don't really know who instigators were. We don't really know who the lead organizers were. There are a lot of people, but you have videos of guys who obviously look like FBI informants saying, "We need to storm the Capitol." But then again, people went along with it. So I don't know how we can actually try to solve this now in November, because it happened. And we can say that it's Facebook's fault, which a lot of people are saying, or we can say it's the fault of Trump, which I think has merit. But we can't allow this to be some regular thing, because again, once we open up the Overton window, once we make it agreeable and acceptable in our political discourse or our political experience, that when you're upset at something, you storm the Capitol, you don't think the left is going to do the same thing? If they don't pass a big climate change bill by the end of Joe Biden's term, you don't think there's going to be some force ready and willing to knock down the halls of Congress, knock down all the doors, find all the Republican senators, and God forbid Joe Manchin? You don't think that's going to happen? I'm willing to bet that something like that could happen. The environmental activists, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with Connor Tomlinson when he's on in the next hour. In the United Kingdom, they have this whole Extinction Rebellion movement. You guys have seen that, or this Insulate Britain movement. And these people have been stopping across bridges, essentially barricading the roads so that trucks and cars cannot pass, because they're trying to bring awareness to climate change and the impact. La-di-da. So what could this mean if we had a similar type of activist movement that would pop up in the U.S., would gather outside of the Capitol, and a lot of the activists, particularly on climate change, are pretty angry folks. I would not put it past them, knowing what we know about January 6th, that something like that could happen again. And that's what we always have to be mindful of. The pendulum always swings back, particularly when we talk about power. Especially power that we allow to a particular individual, a particular politician. Once we allow that to happen, once they take power, whether it be in the presidency or as Congress, the next party, the next person will do exactly the same thing. Maybe they'll use the power a bit differently, but they'll still have the power. There's all these arguments about the War Powers Act, and originally in our Constitution, it's only Congress that's supposed to declare war. The idea was that you did not have this unitary executive who would just launch wars based on a whim. He would actually have to be accountable to the people. And he'd be accountable to the people because Congress, who are elected by the people more directly, would have a say in whether or not we go to war. I think that's a good thing that we have in our Constitution, and that's why you don't want to continually expand the powers of these federal offices, because who knows what they can do. Definitely something you don't like. If you think Joe Biden giving him more and more powers to take on more control when it comes to all the executive orders that he's put out there, when it comes to education, when it comes to the environment, you better believe the next time that there's a Republican in there, they're going to go and they're going to change it up. And that's the problem when we talk about legislating by the pen. We're supposed to be a republic with limited government that limits the power of our officials. Yet, it seems, in a moment of glory, in a moment of tribalism, we're very, very happy to toss the whips to whomever might be in charge if they're on our team. And that's probably the more disturbing thing about January 6th, that after a while, you kind of have to put down the megaphone. You have to put down the foam-fingered number one, Donald J. Trump, and you have to say, look, this actually is a really bad precedent, because we know that the environmental activists, many leftist groups, whether it be voting issues, environmental issues, education issues, they're going to be riled up at some point. And they're going to find it's plenty acceptable or agreeable to do exactly the same thing. And that's what I find the most worrying about this. Thankfully, we have a check on that. We have many of you who are civically minded, who do not want destruction, who do not want chaos, who want to have some kind of law and order, and who are attuned to these issues. And that's exactly what you can do here in Wilmington. Today is Election Day. You can go out there if you believe in these ideas and vote with your feet and your hands. And be sure that the right candidates at the city council level and at the mayoral level win over. Same in Brunswick County, all throughout New Hanover County. You guys have the say. It's Election Day. And this is Talk Radio. And what a day to be alive, ladies and gentlemen. We're the 2nd of November, 2021. I'm Yaël Ossowski here at the mic. We got plenty more to come throughout the course of the afternoon. Some great interviews coming up in the next block. We're finishing up the hour in the next segment and tossing it over to the news, get some updates on what's happening. So for now, we'll be right back after these messages on Big Talker Mornings. Big Talker Mornings, here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM, Wilmington, North Carolina. Thank you guys for tuning in to Talk Radio. You can always listen to the program, not just online on the website, bigtalkerfm.com, but also on the apps and on the YouTube page and Facebook, where we're looking at your comments. We're reading you. We saw what you just said, Patty. We're trying to keep it interactive here. Let's go meta for a bit. And I don't mean meta as in the new Facebook. Let's talk a little bit about radio, talk radio in itself. I think it's an important medium. It's obviously one that I believe in. Why else would I be here behind the mic? Why else would I have a program that is broadcast on this station every Saturday at 10? That's consumerchoiceradio.com. You can find more about that. I've always been fascinated by radio. I think it's a great medium for understanding the issues, for hearing debate, and it's entertaining. And that's one thing that I've always been very drawn to, very attracted to. I got my start in doing college radio. I was at CJLO station, 1690 AM in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, where I went to university. Had my own Friday show. It was actually Friday at 10. It was called Liberty in Exile. Wow, same themes, right? I guess a decade goes by and your ideas change, but they don't change that much. And I always had a great time doing radio. You know, did I get too many calls and people calling in and debating? Not really, but I was able to host some debates. I had a previous host who was on a bit earlier than me, who is a fairly left-wing fella, and we have a little tete-a-tete every now and then. We'd go toe-to-toe, head-to-head on various topics of the day, particularly environment, climate change, as you can guess. And being able to participate in radio is always really interesting to me because it's a medium in which you hear voices, in which you hear complex thoughts and arguments. And if you're not interested, you'll tune out. But you're always waiting for something. You're waiting for an interesting thing that you know about, or perhaps you haven't heard what the news is on a particular topic and you'd like to know a lot more about it. You know, talk radio has changed in the last couple of years, mostly because it's uncertain of where it's going to go. Podcasting is something that is coming up, and no one really took it seriously in the very beginning when podcasting first came about. Podcasting in the mid-2000s was a brainchild of someone named Dave Weiner, an inventor of RSS, with Adam Curry, who was an MTV VJ who had gotten into the technology space. They put their brains together for figuring out what an RSS enclosure would be with an MP3 file. And it would be like a delivery service. Every morning, pop, your computer would automatically search and it would find the audio file. Now that technology is great. And the new realm, the podcasting 2.0, in which people are able to have chapters in their podcast, they're able to donate directly using Bitcoin. There's all these different interesting and fascinating, great things that are happening around podcasting. And at times, podcasting is very much complementary to radio shows. Because radio shows, unlike podcasts, are instantaneous, they're live, they provide instant feedback, breaking news. That's an advantage that you have over podcasts. And then you have the local community. Big Talker FM is right there in downtown Wilmington, North Carolina. Has been for a few years. When local politicians are seeking office, they come to the Big Talker studios, they share their ideas, they try to get their message out. And you can't necessarily have that all the time with podcast. And again, I'm the biggest fan of podcasts. I've hosted many throughout my time. Our own radio show, Consumer Choice Radio, goes out as a podcast. And where possible, I always try to take all of the MP3s of all the shows that I've hosted or done, put them up on my website or put them out on the different channels. But radio is at an interesting juncture. At least talk radio since the early 90s, was sort of in the shadow always of the host Rush Limbaugh. Sort of the conservative firebrand, started in New York, moved down to Florida, had his own Excellence in Broadcasting Institute, company or whatever it might be called. And he really led the way for a lot of people. And it was not just a fascinating and entertaining medium, but it was one of political consequence. It was one that Republican candidates would go on. Some Democrats, if they were brave, would do the same. And it was an interesting way to reach people. If the numbers of Rush Limbaugh were to be believed, he had something to the order of 15 to 20 million listeners a week. I mean, that's a huge amount of impact for one radio host. If we even look at television, they're doing maximum 100,000 on MSNBC a day, and that's like a TV. You don't even know if those people are paying attention or watching. They might just have it on in the background. But radio is a different kind of medium. It's a different sort of theater of the mind. It's a way to interact with the host, with the community, with the topics that are delivered on. Much of the radio stations that you hear are music stations. You might have your public broadcasters like NPR, and then you have private talk radio stations like the Big Talker, host many syndicated shows throughout the day. We'll have the Mike Gallagher show that's on after this. Dana Lash is on later tonight. Larry Elder in the evenings, Dave Ramsey. I think this medium carries on because it is a type of alternative source that people really enjoy. It's something you can leave on in the background. It's something that's interesting. Maybe you'll have interesting guests that you've never heard about before, and you can follow, and you can try to look them up and see what their book is all about or what they've been writing about. Or perhaps it's, a political activist in a particular area, and they've been able to battle something like critical race theory very successfully in Fairfield, Virginia, or something like that. I think that's what radio kind of provides, and I would hope that with all of the commercial pressers, which we know well, and we'll have to go to commercial break here in about 3 minutes, there's a lot of pressure, and it's very difficult, and you're having to compete with a lot of social media, with podcasting in itself, with basically, this is the same problem that the newspapers have. Local newspapers have disappeared. There's actually a great article by my friend Tony Hennon, in the National Review magazine about local journalism, local newspapers. Everyone loves to blame the corporate behemoth, the large companies that will come in and buy 30 newspapers and then eventually drive them to the ground. But he actually makes the case that the reason that the local newspapers have dissipated is that we are focused just much more on the national conversation and national politics and debate. We don't necessarily have that at the local level. I mean, the Port City Daily News is online only. We have some newspapers scattered throughout the area in Wilmington. North Carolina has a host, but many of them are going back to 5 days a week, 6 days a week, sometimes less than that. And a lot of it has to do with civic engagement and people being involved in their communities and wanting to have news from the communities. And a lot of the products are not doing too well either. I mean, I know a lot of local newspapers, and I write for some. First off, they feature me, okay? But also, they're featuring a lot of AP news, normal headlines about something that's happening in Egypt or something that's happening in New York. Where's the local story from the Intrepid Reporter? When I was at the Gaston Gazette newspaper in Gastonia, North Carolina, I went and interviewed people, talked to people. They shut down the local Ryan Steakhouse. Find out what happened. Talk to the owner, talk to the manager. There's something that's happening at the sheriff's department. They have a brand new drone they're going to start using. Well, what's that about? Let's go talk to the sheriff. Let's ask him some questions. Let's find out who makes the drone. These are the kind of things that local journalism is really important for. And unfortunately, we kind of get lost in the national bubbles and the tribalistic bubbles. We're not really paying attention to what's happening locally. And that's really where we can have the most amount of impact and where things can actually impact us. Your property taxes, regulations on housing, zoning, all the things that will impact your life on a day-to-day basis are done right there, usually, in the city council, town council, county commission. And that's why it's important to interact with local media to understand what's happening, because you can't be 24/7 alert. You can't be constantly searching and reading the wires. That's why you have to rely on these media to provide that analysis for you, that resume, that end action item of what you need to know. I think that's what talk radio has done really well over the years. It definitely has helped me, and many times I've listened to talk radio for many years, and I've been able to stay in touch with the communities where I've lived, the people that I've known. I've been interviewed on whenever I've had stories that I've reported about, written about, and I think it's continuously been engaging. And I hope you feel the same way. I hope the Big Talker has been able to do that for you. I hope it brings some perspective as to the local Wilmington community, especially everything that's happening on the beachfront, what's happening with the film industry, what's happening with housing, the construction industry. I mean, there's so much that's happening, and I think we're very lucky in the Wilmington area to be able to say that. So that's my ode to talk radio. Hope you guys appreciate that. We're ending at the hour. First hour here, coming up right now on 8 o'clock. We've got some great interviews lined up in the next hour with Connor Tomlinson, talking about everything with the environment and what's happening in Scotland. And then we'll also be talking with Eric Peterson about all things internet, broadband, and the Biden administration plans that could affect you in North Carolina. Plus a special nugget with TK Turbo. Stay tuned to the Big Talker in the morning. We'll be right back after this.
So it is with the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
In your heart, you know he's right.
I hear there's rumors on the internets.
Good morning, Wilmington. Welcome here, Big Talker Mornings, coming to you every morning, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. I'm your host for today. I was here tomorrow on the mic as well, Yaël Ossowski, reporting to you. You can find me on Twitter at Yaël Ossowski. We got a lot of stuff for the next hour. We've got two guests coming on to talk to us about various issues of big importance, whether it be climate change and Glasgow and COP, whatever's happening overseas, where they're going to tell us exactly how much our taxes should be on gasoline and other products. We're going to be talking with Connor Tomlinson about that, and we'll be speaking with Eric Peterson of the Pelican Center, all about broadband, the internet, net neutrality even, and what that will mean for you going forward. There's a lot of changes up there in D.C. that could impact you, particularly in North Carolina, and we've got some very good examples for that. So it's a great morning here. Thanks for tuning in for hour number 2. Just past 8 o'clock here. Just heard the news break. And now we're set. And normally we would have one of the great reporters from the Carolina Journal on. I couldn't swing it this week, unfortunately. But they always have some great articles over there on carolinajournal.com. And we're set for Election Day. They do have a couple of primers here talking about various candidates, particularly up there. I think they're in the Raleigh area, so they're giving a bit of analysis as to what is happening there. But, you know, when it comes to the local election and what's happening, I've rattled off enough. You guys know it's Election Day here in Wilmington, in New Hanover County, in Brunswick County. You guys can get out there. You already know the candidates by this point. You probably heard some of them on our station, and you're ready to go out there and make an impact. But let's go to the Carolina Journal. One of my favorite writers over there is my former colleague, John Trump. John is a great reporter. I believe he's the managing editor of the Carolina Journal. Whenever I've guest hosted on this station, I've had him on. I've interviewed him on. We worked together back in the day at another news outlet. He was one of my editors and he definitely cut down many of my pieces, I'll tell you that right now. But he's got a very interesting beat. I would definitely recommend his book. Let's look this up. John Trump. It's called Still and Barrel. That's right. It's all about essentially the craft spirits industry and history in the state of North Carolina. Still and Barrel, Craft Spirits in the Old North State, it's called. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it in any bookstore, really. I think I even saw it at Barnes & Noble last time I was in Charlotte. So you can see it everywhere. John has some great takes, great reporting, great analysis on everything related to alcohol and alcohol regulation in our state of North Carolina. And he discusses in a recent piece, I believe it's from yesterday, about the town of Robbinsville. So this is in the mountains of western North Carolina. It's actually the state's last dry county. So they're voting whether to allow the sale of beer and wine, folks. Now, at least in Wilmington, this is kind of foreign. I know many of you are, you're picking up receipts in your room from, your weekend adventures at the brewery or some of the bars that you were hanging out in. But in North Carolina, particularly in the mountains, there's still a lot of areas that are not allowed to serve alcohol. Isn't that pretty insane? So this vote will be really interesting. I believe this vote is going to take place today. It's about 600 people in this town, fairly small. Alcohol has been outlawed there for over 70 years. And basically, we're in 2021, guys. If we remember, Prohibition ended how long ago? Back in 1930s, 1933? And we're in 2021 and still discussing this. I find this is so fascinating in the state of North Carolina that we have this North Carolina Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission. They were set up in the 1930s, and they have become such an impediment to a thriving alcohol market in our state. I've written many op-eds about this in the Charlotte Observer and a couple other papers. It has incensed me not because I'm some drinking aficionado, not because I'm a big drinker in itself, but because it hoses the people. It raises the costs artificially. It means that you pay more. All of those costs are passed on to you. And it's crazy. In the state of North Carolina, we have 167 local ABC boards. These are boards that have their own budgets. People get their own salaries. And they determine what the price of liquor and spirits will be. They'll determine at what time the stores can open and close, whether or not they can have a store in this city or that part of the county. It's just completely removed from how other states do it. And this is the thing, is we don't even have to think crazily like let's have an open market like parts of Europe, which would be great. But if we just look at other states like Florida or even South Carolina where they have drive-in liquor stores, they're not owned by the government. Oh my. This is the kind of innovation that could easily be happening, but we've been stuck in the past. I don't know exactly why. I think there's a lot of, you could say there's a religious aspect. You could say there's an aspect, particularly in the mountains, that are just very opposed to allowing alcohol to flow more freely, which is just crazy to think in a state as diverse as North Carolina, where we have the beaches, we have the mountains, we have college towns, we have a thriving populace, a metropolis in Charlotte. I guess Raleigh, much the same. Wonderful beach towns, coast towns like Wilmington. To think that we're still in this era where alcohol needs to be this regulated, I think is pretty insane. You agree with me? What do you think about that? Because this is the kind of stuff that when you're young, when you're growing up in North Carolina and you're understanding the laws and the rules, obviously you still have to wait until you're 21 and all of that. But then once you are 21 and you start being able to go to bars and you start wondering about wines and looking into vineyards and all this kind of stuff, you realize that, wow, our system is really difficult. My colleagues at the Consumer Choice Center and I, we actually did an index where we're looking at how many people can have alcohol delivered to their homes. In many states, including in Illinois, in Florida, and in New York, you can actually just open up an app. Something called Drizzly is one of the more popular ones, and you can order a bottle of wine to your house. Now, in North Carolina, can't do that. Surely cannot order a bottle of whiskey. That's never going to happen. And in many other countries, you can actually go to Amazon and buy bottles of wine and bottles of liquor and beer and all the rest. Buying online is not necessarily we can always do. They do allow it somewhat. There are loopholes in North Carolina, particularly if we order from wineries out of state and if they have a deal with a winery that's in the state, and it's all complicated. And there's just a lot of red tape, regulations, costs, taxes, restrictions that make it more expensive. And why do I care about that? Because it means that you have less disposable income at the end of the day. You have less disposable income to feed your families, to be able to go out to the restaurants, to be able to participate in the broader society, go to baseball games, hang out, go to the park. I mean, all the great things that we're able to do when we can afford food and time, products. We want to have dance classes for our kids. I mean, there's all kinds of this stuff that more disposable income allows us to have. So there's some morning alcohol diatribes here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM, courtesy of John Trump, by the way. Please do read him over there at the Carolina Journal. They've always had some great articles, great analysis. They have their own sort of radio and podcast section as part of the John Locke Foundation. So that's a very good organization. I hope you guys sign up for many of their updates and throughout the course of the election year and much beyond. They'll have some very good stuff. Let's take a look at the North State Journal. North State Journal is a newer paper here in the state of North Carolina that discusses a lot of the local politics that are happening, but also state-level politics in Raleigh. And one thing that I've always found very interesting about a lot of the local papers and things coming out of Raleigh, everything is somewhat Raleigh-centric. We have to read, the Raleigh News and Observer to get a bit more insight into what the House is thinking or what the state Senate is thinking and who's going to do which trick over that. And it's that kind of stuff to where they're always going to have an advantage, but it has to be made relevant because, we're, as North Carolinians, you're going to be impacted by a lot of this stuff. It doesn't matter, where you are, what's happening. You're going to be impacted by exactly the rules that are passed in Raleigh and whatever restrictions they're going to come up with. Oddly enough, I don't find anything interesting at the North State Journal right now. So it looks like this outlet is dead to me. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cast that by the side. We're going to hit delete on that, producer. Can we go ahead and do that? Perfect. Thank you. All right. We're going to go to segment 2 here right after the commercial break. We'll be speaking with Eric Peterson. And Eric Peterson is going to give us the lowdown on everything related to broadband and the internet and Joe Biden's plans on what is he going to do when it comes to broadband, particularly when it comes to the infrastructure bills. Eric is the director of Center for Technology and Innovation at the Pelican Institute for Public Policy down there in Nollins, and he's provided some great insight in the past, and I know he'll do the same here. So I want you guys to stay tuned for that interview, and after that we'll have Connor Tomlinson on of the British Conservation Alliance to talk to us about climate change and all of the various giddies that they're doing up there in Glasgow, Scotland, Joe Biden and the rest, as they're trying to come up with a global plan for emissions and a global plan for what they'd like to do in terms of all things energy. So stay tuned to the Big Talker Mornings. I'm your host, Yaël Ossowski. We'll be right back after this break. Interviews coming up, Election Day on the horizon, and another beautiful sunny day in Wilmington, North Carolina. And welcome back to Big Talker Mornings here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM, broadcasting out of Wilmington, North Carolina. What a fun-filled morning today. We've had plenty of different guests on, talking on all the topics. One thing that we wanted to discuss is everything related to the internet and broadband. It's something that we discussed yesterday. It's something that we went into a little bit earlier in the program, but now we have an expert on who's written about this, has an article up in the Washington Examiner. We're speaking with Eric Peterson. He's the director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the Pelican Institute for Public Policy and a contributor at Young Voices. Eric, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's an exciting time for these topics, just like you were saying.
So there's a couple of things that are on the docket. I mean, look, I got lost in all of the negotiations and infrastructure bills, and this is passing, but that's not. What is the update on the bill that you wrote about related to infrastructure? I got no idea what's going on. I know it was $100 billion on broadband. Then we heard there was a little bit less. What are the kind of dollars and cents of the moment when it comes to some of these negotiations, and how much money the government's going to be spending on these broadband projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a little hesitant to make any predictions because these things seem to change moment by moment. But as far as spending for broadband goes, there seemed to be general bipartisan agreement, which is why it was in the bipartisan infrastructure proposal, that $65 billion was the number to spend on broadband, or to continue to spend more on broadband, should I say. That broke down pretty broadly. $40 billion was going to be for a federal grant program to build out in areas that didn't have internet access. About $10 billion was going to be set aside for making broadband internet more affordable to those who might have trouble paying for it. And then a few billion here and a few billion there just for a few miscellaneous items. As far as the $3.5 trillion package is concerned, or whatever that's been whittled down to, there wasn't actually a lot of broadband spending in that one, but it did look like there was going to be some money in terms of a tax credit specifically for government-owned networks, which is concerning for a few reasons, which we can get into later when it looks like how much the government is not just building out the expansion of private networks, but is getting in the broadband game itself.
So this is the municipal broadband networks. I know there are a number of cities that have put these up. Essentially, you have your local municipal water supply, you have your local municipal electricity company, and then you can have your local municipal internet company. What are some examples of places that have had these municipal networks, and how do they generally fare against the private ISPs that I think most of us use?
Yeah. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Pelican Institute, we are in Louisiana, and we have an example of one of these municipal networks gone wrong. Lafayette, Louisiana. It's a fairly large city in Louisiana. Back in 2005, they set up one of these networks. And I think the interesting thing about it is oftentimes we talk about these networks, they're sold like they're going to close the digital divide, like they're going to provide internet access to those that don't have it. And in reality, what they're really doing is trying to compete with the private sector using government dollars. But even with those really big advantages, they tend to have a lot of problems. And Lafayette, Louisiana is just one more example of that, where they weren't able to get the number of subscribers they wanted to. They were dealing with private sector competition. And so as a result, they actually started charging for services rendered to the local power company and water company for services they didn't actually render. And that was the only way they were staying afloat. So overall, I would say that's a pretty typical case. They tend not to fare pretty well. And it's because, think about how much the internet has changed in the last 15, 16 years compared to how much your electricity or water has changed in 15, 16 years. Networks are a dynamic, innovative technology. And, when that's doing, government is not the best to set up to make these sort of investments and changes that consumers want.
We're speaking with Eric Peterson here on The Big Talker. In the morning, we're talking all things technology, broadband, internet, the role of the government, and what are all these huge spending bills about that are happening in D.C. And if we head on over to the Washington Examiner website, Eric has written an article, and we'll put that in the show notes, all about this topic. I love that you mentioned the crowding out, particularly when it comes to the municipal networks. Again, most of us would understand this from an economic perspective. One point that you mentioned in the article that I found interesting, and this is related to North Carolina, where we're coming from, is that there are restrictions on municipal networks in some states. Now, I actually would make the point that I find these to be not helpful. And it's this kind of strange conundrum that we've seen in Michigan and Florida, where there are jurisdictions or state legislators that kind of pass these preemption bills. I'm sure you're familiar with those. In this case, is it not more harmful to have a state government, let's be honest, usually controlled by Republicans, say, no way, you're not allowed to try this out, rather than allowing cities to try and fail? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly plenty of cities that have tried and have failed. Um, when it comes to preemptions, they actually run the gamut. For example, Louisiana just has something called the Louisiana Fair Competition Act. And all that means is there's actually no prohibition for starting up a government owned network. All that means is that they have to have certain taxpayer protections in there. They have to go to a vote of the people. Oftentimes, when you get these networks, it's sort of a Music Man type scenario where some big consultants come into a local government that has fallen on a windfall, say a bunch of money from the federal government for COVID relief, and they say, hey, we're going to fix your internet problem for you. We're going to set you up with this municipal owned network. It doesn't go to a vote of the people, and they sort of build out this network. And at the end, taxpayers are left holding the bag, whether or not they voted on it or not. So, I mean, I think you can make some arguments on whether or not it deserves a total preemption, but certainly protections in there and forcing them to go through some sort of market process for, the government getting in the business of providing a private service. I certainly think is worthwhile.
Yeah, there's definitely some important points there. And, we've talked about preemption laws when it comes to things like straws. They don't allow straw bans. I think it was in Michigan, the state legislator passed that, and they had discussed it in Florida. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., we have the straw police, making sure that restaurants are handing out those plastic straws. So there's plenty that's going on there. Eric, while I have you on the line, I know that you write about many different topics in the area of technology, and one of them that you seem to be all in on, and we talked about more yesterday, was the fate of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies more generally, but Bitcoin specifically. Sort of as a guy who looks at what's happening regulatory-wise when it comes to technology policy, how is it looking right now when it comes to crypto regulation or Bitcoin? What are your thoughts on that? Do we see that this is going to be, drained by Washington, D.C. and many of the regulatory agencies? Or do you think crypto is just far too strong for the regulatory hands to get a hold of?
If I knew the answer for that for sure, I would definitely also give you crypto investment advice, which I'm not prepared to do. But I would say this when I look at the broad sense of things. One is that Washington is moving slowly, and I think they are leaning into a more regulatory stance. But I think, especially looking at the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which we discussed a little earlier for its broadband portion, that bill was almost held up due to some reporting requirements on cryptocurrency that were very poorly written, would be almost impossible to implement. So I think it goes to show that Washington is paying attention to the issue. What I would say is I think this is a great case of federalism. There are a lot of states, especially state lawmakers, that are embracing cryptocurrency and Bitcoin through mechanisms called regulatory sandboxes. States like Hawaii and Arizona have put in these sort of sandboxes that allow these new and innovative technologies to work through the regulatory process, to work with regulators. And as a result, they've seen a lot of investment in these new businesses, and they've created jobs, they've created wealth. And so I think that the states are really going to serve as a bulwark against over-regulation from Washington, D.C. It's one of the benefits of the American system as opposed to, say, the Chinese system, in which the Communist Party says, we don't like Bitcoin, and then it basically shuts down overnight. I would also say that there's a lot of folks interested in Bitcoin mining, especially energy-rich states like Louisiana, and I think it's going to continue to build a lot of cryptocurrency fans.
Yeah, and I would point our listeners over to Reason.com, where Eric has an article about not just cryptocurrency innovation, but specifically the company Coinbase and how they were targeted by the SEC. And it's probably not the last innovative crypto company that will be targeted by this organization that Elon Musk said he had no respect for anymore. So more to come on that. Eric, sort of in parting here in our last minute, what are some of the other technological projects, innovations, regulatory threats, things that you're looking out for in your day-to-day job that many of the listeners should be aware about?
Yeah, it's been a great few years where people haven't been yelling about on the internet about net neutrality. But if you look at the recent Biden nominations to the FCC, it looks like net neutrality might become the number one issue the Federal Communications Commission is dealing with again. And that's rather unfortunate because there's been some really good bipartisan agreement that closing the digital divide, making sure that all Americans have access to fast and reliable internet has been what they've going for. And it looks like they're going to get back into sort of partisan fighting on that. But, the battle lines might have changed over the years. Certainly, a lot of the doom and gloom predictions about net neutrality being repealed have not come to pass. So we'll see what that looks like. I'm hopeful that we can focus on more constructive things, but, I'm a little pessimistic as well.
Oh, well, net neutrality, not the kind of thing that we want to see happen once more. So we've been speaking with Eric Peterson, director of the Center for Technology and Innovation at the Pelican Institute for Public Policy and a contributor at Young Voices. Eric, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we'll do it there, wrap it up with Eric, and we'll be right back. We're going to go to a commercial break, make sure that we pay the bills on time as we have to do. It's a good market-infused transaction. Thank you guys for listening. Yaël Ossowski here on Big Talker Mornings. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Big Talker Mornings here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM, broadcasting out of Wilmington, North Carolina. We told you guys we'd get into the issues. We want to go a little bit global, but we also want to follow up on what our dear President Joe Biden, let's go Brandon, is doing across the pond. And for that, we wanted to bring in a resident expert on all topics related to the environment, to conservation, and to great ideas in public policy. We're speaking with Connor Tomlinson. He's policy director at the British Conservation Alliance and also a contributor to Young Voices. Connor, thanks so much for coming on the radio program.
It's a pleasure. Let's go, Brandon.
All right, so there's a couple things. Careful. So let's talk about a couple of things that are happening. I saw the news, something happened in Glasgow. We got the G20. We've got COP26. You've actually written about this topic. I tried to follow the news. I don't really know what's happening. I don't really know what they're agreeing to. You're someone who cares about the environment. You understand these issues. You do believe in the power of markets as a sort of force to bring about some change and some good. Are they taking that direction in Scotland this week?
Tragically not. So some background for your listeners. COP26 stands for Conference of Partners. Is a really inspiring name. Basically, it's a giant party for the political class to have at the taxpayers' expense. Well, they're all going to sit around a big table and say how they're going to spend your money on climate-related issues. Think the Paris Accords of 2015, the one that nobody really paid any attention to. And then when President Trump left, America started leading the world in reducing emissions because they weren't stuck by the bureaucratic nightmare of those particular agreements. Think that, but just about 6 years later. This was due to happen last year in Glasgow, but a funny little thing called COVID happened and the entire world got locked down, particularly the UK, which had the 5th harshest lockdowns in the world. We had about 18 months of it. It's pretty terrible, but could be worse. Could be Australia. Essentially, they're all just gathering in the room and talking about, okay, we've got a 2050 commitment to get to net neutral, which is zero carbon emissions by 2050, because that's apparently laid out in the IPCC report as the year in which the world will implode if we don't. Because if we limit our warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we'll be able to avoid the most catastrophic effects of projected climate change. Now, just a little bit of a clarification. The IPCC report doesn't have any actual apocalyptic claims. The old AOC claim of the world's going to end in 10 years, a lot of activist groups picked that up and ran with it, especially across the pond. We have our own brand of eco-terrorism. You guys have the Sunrise Movement. We have Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain. They sort of sit in the road and try and block traffic routes and say, oh, okay, we need to insulate our houses to help fuel poverty. It's been a bit of a disaster recently. Essentially, these guys have turned around and said, okay, if we limit our emissions to zero, that sort of thing will stop happening. Now, the Climate Change Committee turned around and said, okay, if you did all that, even if you got China to convince them to turn off all their coal plants tomorrow, which, by the way, the UK represents 1% of all emissions. China, by the 250 coal plants they're reopening, is going to make 16% more global emissions in half the time it would take us to get to zero. That's neither here nor there. If you got China to commit to zero tomorrow, every country in the world stop doing fossil fuels, everyone stop throwing plastic straws in the ocean, here, there, everywhere, then it's only a 50% shot that it would reverse any effects of remote global warming or sea level rising, etc. So it's going to be a very expensive summit, and it's going to be a conversation about which direction to go in a form of eco-socialism for solutions which might not even work and for technology that isn't quite there yet.
All right, so I'm going to slow you down a little bit, Connor, because I'm sure our southern listeners aren't necessarily attuned to what is happening on the other side of the pond. I want to get into the Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain. And we've seen some of the images and videos of these various blockades on bridges and roads. and you have sort of ordinary, I guess you would call them lorry drivers, truck drivers who, get out and, I don't know, move the guys physically, kind of tussle with them. I wonder if, because you mentioned the eco-socialism part, if there's going to be an agreement in Glasgow, are we going to see a revolt much like we saw in France with the yellow vests? Is that something that you think is going to come increasingly to not just Britain, but many other countries that sign up to these accords and then stick to these punitive measures?
I think we're particularly subdued over in Britain. So I wouldn't say that we took the lockdown measures lying down, but it was very much a city-focused pushback against the sort of lockdown measures. So when there were the lockdown protests as well, they were very unilaterally policed. We had a few BLM rallies over here, not nearly to the extent of the US, but our anti-lockdown protests were cracked down on. So anything like the yellow vest protests, which in France obviously were protesting against the carbon taxes and the fuel taxes that put a lot of industries out of work and raised fuel prices for a lot of working households, anything like that, I would be surprised if that would happen in Britain, but I wouldn't, obviously in a peaceful manner, I wouldn't be opposed to it happening because we're going to see a lot of punitive taxation. So we had our Chancellor go on the television a little while ago, and he was interviewed by one of the premier journalists on GB News. At the time, he no longer works there. Bit of a spat there for anyone who wants to see the sort of infighting in the UK media. It's almost as bad as the US, but he went on there and said, oh, what's the cost of net zero? Because we never actually sat down and had a conversation of what these policies are going to cost the taxpayer. I went to the Conservative Party conference in October and spoke to Chris Skidmore, who was the former universities minister, who changed the commitment from 2035 to 2050, 100% no emissions. And he said, oh, how did you cost that? And he went, oh, I just sort of changed the number. So there was no conversation about how expensive this was going to be. When they spoke to the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, he said, oh, well, yeah, we can probably ballpark it in about the billion statistic. Now, what government project ever comes in under or on budget is always the question. And then the interviewer said, well, aren't you meant to be conservative? You were elected on the party of low tax. And he went, yeah, I'm a fiscal conservative because I realize it's not my money. Oh, isn't that fantastic? That's like a mugger running up to you and saying, don't worry, I'll spend this really wisely. Well, I would have rather kept hold of my wallet and spent it rather wisely myself. Thank you very much. So they're internalizing a lot of the costs on the taxpayer. And I don't think there's going to be a sort of appetite for a working man's low tax revolt against this, a sort of Tea Party style, but for the climate. Instead, in Britain, we're seeing the pernicious phenomena of Extinction Rebellion in Insulate Britain, who are set up by people who run communes, who are massive egotists. A gentleman named Roger Hallam, who was kicked out of Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion, which he founded because he said, oh, the Holocaust was just another screw up in human history, so minimizing that. Then went on to found Insulate Britain. They're pushing for massive government spending. They have sort of vanguardist socialist approach to saying, okay, we want climate assemblies, so appoint the people. We're not going to actually put forward any solutions, but give us all the power and money first, and we'll figure it out as we go along. Funnily enough, all of these groups end up being, hey, our solution is give us all the money and the power, and it's the exact same people, so we can presume that money and power and not solving the environment is the goal. Unfortunately, that's more the appetite of the activism we have over here rather than sort of sensible working man's policy of don't spend all our money.
So you're listening to Big Talker Mornings here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. We're speaking with King George's cousin, if you guys have heard it well here, Connor Tomlinson, Policy Director at the British Conservation Alliance and a contributor at Young Voices. One thing I wanted to ask, Connor, is let's say you had your way. Let's say they put you in the driver's seat. God forbid, they put you up front, I guess on the right side of the car, and they said, all right, what should the environmental policy be? So your organization and sort of what you stand for is more about empowering the next generation with pro-market principles when it comes to the environment. If we were to do a global pact, what should it look like if you were driving?
Well, first of all, I'd say wouldn't fall asleep at the wheel, unlike President Biden and Boris Johnson, who took a nap during the recent talks. Not the most prescient of behavior when you're facing a coming apocalypse, apparently. But for me, I would say I would contradict exactly what they've done at this sort of G20 and then the COP26 summit of combating a global race to the bottom with corporate taxes. We should be having a low tax race to the bottom. We should be creating the incentive structures for investment, for people to create and innovate our way out of these particular pervasive and environmental issues in the future, because the profit motive is the driving force behind human ingenuity throughout all of history. And no country has ever gotten more economically or environmentally prosperous by impoverishing its people. We can see this with the Kuznets curve. So correlating with rising GDP, environmental consciousness also goes up and levels out. And then the two match off, and you get a prosperous society where you get a raised standard of living, lower mortality levels, but also nicer parks, cleaner air, cleaner water, etc. What we would need to do is create the incentive structures for things like renewables to be developed. Also, nuclear investment. I've written about this in a paper titled "It's Easy Being Green," which I have a sneaking suspicion Boris Johnson stole the Kermit the Frog reference from for his UN speech, but that's neither here nor there. I wrote that with the Adam Smith Institute earlier this year, and it looks at how we can fund new nuclear plants without having to rely on China like we presently are in the UK. How it looks that we can, if they're trying to introduce a carbon tax, which they're set on doing, how we can at least make it revenue neutral and try and negotiate our way out of the tax hellhole, and also to look at carbon-based free trade agreements. So rather than buying all your goods cheap from nations which hate us, like China, or sourcing all your energy from Russia, if we work within the countries which are our international allies historically, the Kanzak nations, US, or the Commonwealth nations, if we can produce goods that are both low carbon and also more ethically sourced than in sweatshops, then that will go a long way into making a more economically viable, environmentally viable, and politically palatable future.
Oh, very good. I just got about a minute and a half, so I got to reel you in here. But one thing that let's say, international conservatives, let's say Kanzak conservatives, are probably a bit happier about than many North Americans is the idea of a carbon tax. Where do you stand on a carbon tax? Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Are there examples to follow or avoid? What do you think about that?
So I think the implementation of carbon tax has been a bit dodgy where it has been done. I know Australia's had varying success for it. I know British Columbia tried to implement it. It didn't go very well. And I know France, again, as we said earlier about the yellow vests, it kicked up quite the fuss in terms of raising the cost of living for average households. I think with fossil fuels, particularly with the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people have been characterizing it as Britain's original sin. I completely disagree with that. I think it's almost like getting hooked on painkillers. It's necessary to get over the original illness. It got us off wood burning. It raised the standard of living for plenty of people around the world, still is doing that, stopped infant mortality and all that. But then as emerging technologies that are cleaner and greener and less lethal emerge and are developed, we can wean ourselves off that. We've got to do it slowly. So if you want to tax that externality and try and get fossil fuel companies to innovate into new fields of technology and make a new viable business model, sure, but then try and make it so the cost isn't internalized on the consumers. Now, I'm very much a staunch libertarian at heart, so I think scrapping forms of corporate tax, income tax, etc., to meet that would be excellent. And then after they get rid of carbon, the carbon tax is no longer useful. The examples of those low tax havens that the countries will become with lower income tax, etc., those should stick around because it will just show how much a low tax nation can be a very prosperous and thriving.
Smart. All right, we've been speaking with Connor Tomlinson, Policy Director at the British Conservation Alliance. Connor, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Pleasure, anytime.
All right, we'll be right back after these messages, guys. Stay tuned. Big Talker 106.7 FM. And welcome back to Big Talker Mornings here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. Broadcasting every single Monday to Friday, 7 to 10 a.m. I'm Yaël Ossowski. I'm here for today. And we're going to have Chad Adams, who'll be on for the rest of the week. He'll be taking over the mic. He'll be doing some interviews, and I know he'll be giving his take on everything related to not just the elections locally in Wilmington, but all things in state politics, of which he is an expert, and also national. So be sure to tune in for that. Also tonight here on The Big Talker at 6 p.m. we have All Things Brunswick. You can listen to the local guys, chat about all things that are happening throughout the county. And then we've got a great slew of the syndicated programming throughout the rest of the day after this program. And you guys can enjoy that. Go over to bigtalkerfm.com for the entire schedule of programming and shows. It's a very rich schedule. Plenty of programs that you will like all week long and throughout the weekend as well. When you're in the garage, working on the car, perhaps out with the kids, you can also tune in to the Big Talker. So another thing I wanted to bring up really if we're looking back at the last two interviews, we talked about, and I got to apologize there for Connor in that last one. He's a British fella, should have told him to slow it down a bit for Southern radio, who's speaking a bit fast. Very fast for me, too, and I've met a good number of British people in my life. But he's a fired up young man, and I think he brought some good perspective on everything that's happening. He also mentioned the global minimum corporate tax, this kind of thing that they're agreeing to over there in Europe. That this definitely won't impact consumers. It definitely won't impact you, right? But Eric Peterson in that other segment, we were talking about the internet, we were talking about broadband, and we briefly mentioned net neutrality. We didn't go deep into it, but if you remember the net neutrality debate, this goes back, really to, what was it back then? Geez, it was like 2014, and it was the idea that we're going to regulate internet service providers and the internet. We were going to regulate it like a public utility. Like the water companies, like the gas companies, like the energy companies. That's how we were going to regulate internet service providers. This was the idea of the Obama administration and net neutrality back in the day. And they, were able to get that passed. It was kind of stalled in court. And by the time that Donald Trump came into office and Ajit Pai was the head of the Federal Communications Commission, they'd gotten rid of that. And the internet, I believe, has gotten way better for it. Because it's essentially an argument about decentralization of the internet or centralization. Centralization under the boot of a government agency. And I think that debate will carry on. The FCC confirmations are going to be lining up with all the Democrats who are there. And this is going to impact a lot of people, folks. It's going to impact you. It's going to be the cost of your internet every month, whether you have it bundled or not. That's something that could go significantly up. We're already paying through the nose, looking at the infrastructure bill, if that passes, to construct all broadband throughout the entire country, even places where it's not needed, and kind of leaving the private market and private investment out of it, which I think is a very problematic aspect. But I like the way that Connor was approaching things. He's obviously a calm, mild-mannered fella, and brought some good perspective on exactly what we should focus on, particularly those of us who are interested in these ideas, who are interested in sound government, or interested in limited government, and making sure that we have some kind of workable model so that the internet is protected. Because look, net freedom is incredibly important. Net freedom is, for us, one of the best things that the internet has provided us. It allows you to open up a website, write whatever you want, have your social media networks if you want it, put your business website on there, and you're able to do that with no, internet censor, like in the Chinese Communist Party and the Great Firewall. You're able to do that on your own, and we think that's been a great advantage, and it's surely why the American economy has evolved the way that it has, and it's how it's gotten so great and so grand, because we've had this light touch when it comes to the internet, when it comes to digital projects and technology, that we've been able to become the landing page or the global marketplace for where you want your internet products, your internet services. And if we have something like net neutrality, if we have more power from the federal government to try to tell us where we should build, broadband lines, and then when we get into the content moderation debate, that's a whole other deal. Because believe me, everyone you've ever met has said something that you probably would not like, and that some moderator at some point would deem offensive, or would want to delete or censor, or would suspend your account or delete your account. That's happening to a lot of people. Many people like to put the blame on the platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and the rest, but look, they're only responding to the the demands that they have of the politicians. I mean, how many times have we seen these executives thrown before the wolves in Congress? I mean, they have to go up there every 2 weeks. They probably have an apartment to pay for because they're there so often. There's all this pressure that's put on them. They're labeled killers, genocide enablers, all of this kind of, it's just absolutely ridiculous. The left, they want to censor more. The right says they want to censor less, or they want to censor other people. How about we just not censor as much anymore? Let's leave it to the sites. Let's not have, a grand federal policy. That to me is pretty dangerous. Because if we have a federal policy that will be put together about how we moderate content online, this is going to destroy a lot of the great websites that we have out there, a lot of the services that we had out there. It might eradicate Section 230, which is an important part of the Communications Decency Act that provides that creative freedom online, so that if you have a blog and somebody posts on it and writes some heinous thing, you're not dragged into court. You're not sued. Facebook isn't sued if your crazy uncle puts up some terrible post. That's a great part of the internet and internet freedom. But there are a lot of people who'd like to do it away because, I don't know, because Trump lost his account, or because Democrats say that Facebook threw the election to Trump. I mean, there's all kinds of excuses that you guys have heard. I don't think any of them are justified. I think the default answer should always be, why should you have this power? And if they can't give you a legitimate response, something that cannot be used against, the opposing party or another political side, yeah, maybe we don't go down that route. Maybe we avoid it. And I hope these debates work, because I know that it's difficult to, and it's very easy to blame platforms. It's easy to blame Facebook because it's something you log into. And it's something you see, and you might not, maybe you log in, you see something you don't like on there. But for the government, it's kind of hard. There's no government portal. I've been trying to reach out to congressmen up and down just for interviews, and that's sometimes pretty hard. They don't have their emails publicly written. They don't personally check it. They have all the staff members, and there's 87 different steps you need to take in order to contact them. And, if that's how representative government works, I mean, what's it going to look like when they start regulating the internet and you have a complaint? What are you going to do then? Not good. Not looking good in that angle. So that's what I've been thinking about, particularly when it comes to the internet and online and creative freedom. And, much of that applies to the battles of talk radio of the day. The idea of the fairness doctrine, that there needs to be equal side given if there's a political opinion made. I don't know who my opposite would be. I don't know who you guys think that would be. Some totally sane person, I bet, who has very legitimate views, no doubt. But these issues are very important, and, it's not just going to be the tech bros who are going to save us. I don't necessarily believe in that mantra. I think the tech bros specifically have just given us tools, and it's up to us to use them. People have all kinds of things they put on Facebook or on Instagram, or using WhatsApp or any of these other programs or projects or platforms. And it's up to them what they do with it. And you can judge the people based on that. Let's not eradicate and eviscerate the platforms so that nobody can use them. I mean, I know specifically in Wilmington, there are plenty of small businesses that use things like Facebook for their small business marketing, for reaching out to new people, for trying to find customers to their stores. If we start, again, restricting this, making it more difficult, I mean, why would you as a company even take the time to register for an account or to put any money in there? It's not an attractive thing. It's not an attractive thing. It doesn't make it fun. And I fear if we give more power to the government, and if we give more power to these infrastructure bills, broadband, and there's general more centralization and more oversight of the internet as an entity or as protocols or a bunch of tubes, no matter what, I think we're all going to be the worst for it. And maybe not right now, but believe me, when your political party is out of power completely, the pendulum will swing back. Because that is the lesson of the day, ladies and gentlemen, on Big Talker Mornings. The pendulum always swings back. So it's election day, everybody. Big Talker Mornings. Yaël Ossowski here at the mic. Plenty more to come here in the next hour. We've got a nice interview with our TK Turbo. Stay tuned to Big Talker.
So it is with the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
In your heart, you know he's right.
I hear there's rumors on the internets.
Wilmington, North Carolina. You're listening to the Big Talker. Big Talker Mornings here. Yaël Ossowski on the mic, bringing it to you. Here early in the morning, November 2nd, 2021. We are entering our third hour. Right after 9 o'clock. Just heard the news. Had a great day so far. I know it is election day, and many of you are probably stuttering back to your offices after casting your ballots, or maybe you did a bit earlier. Good to know that you're getting involved. Local elections matter. Thanks for doing your part. It has been a morning. Am I right? Don't worry, FCC. We're on the right side of history here. We've had some great interviews this morning talking about all things internet, discussing all things related to climate change and what's happening in the United Kingdom, and a little bit about local affairs in North Carolina, the January 6 riots, and the House Democrats up there in Raleigh walking out. There's been a lot of contentious affairs there. I wanted to talk about, the personal finance angle has been really interesting. And I've tried to avoid talking about COVID. I do that as best I can. Basically, all I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of change to our society when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the time after. We can focus more on that. We can debate the vaccines and everything else a bit later. But when we look at particularly the retiring generation, a lot of people have been retiring in larger numbers, and we've seen a lot of stories about labor shortfalls, obviously. And the labor shortfalls are because the economy is getting back on track. We're getting back finally to the amount of consumption that we had before, to the amount of investment. And most people who have left the labor force, or they've found other work, maybe they are on Social Security and they're retired, or maybe they're on unemployment and they have been for a long time. But essentially, these people are not working in those areas. And, we've heard of truck drivers who are being offered $100,000 a year to drive the truck and to make a good living, taking merchandise from one part of the country to the other. We've heard of a lot of the hospitality areas, not just restaurants, but hotels that are really, really scrounging for workers right now. They've been raising wages, going as high as $15, $20, $25 an hour. And it is changing a lot of different things in our society, because now we're not in this great want. I mean, at least for me, I grew up in the time, I graduated high school back in 2007. So you guys can go ahead and calculate my age there. And during that time, it was the so-called Great Recession. We had George Bush on television looking really worried. We had Hank Paulson, who was then Secretary of the Treasury, talking about how basically the economy was about to implode. And then for the next, several years, it was all this talk of Great Recession, things aren't looking great. It's not a good time to try to enter the workforce, I'll tell you that right now. But it made it seem as if, we were destitute and things were never going to get better. And, over time, we snapped back from that. We had good certainty in the market, in the economy. People were finding work. And now we're in a situation where even after a colossal drop in the number of people working thanks to shutdowns from the government, we're having a problem filling a lot of roles. And I've seen it everywhere. And I'm sure you have too. And this impacts a lot of different things. And there's a lot of different incentives and reasons for why they have not been able to recruit for those positions. Some say it is pay, but some say it's also competition. Competition from government unemployment, from stimulus checks, from the money that comes from government coffers. If you're getting paid more to sit at home, it's probably somewhat more attractive than going to work down at Trader Joe's bagging groceries or working at Best Buy. But I went from graduating high school and being in that end part where really things were looking grim. Bad. There are all these bailouts, the TARP bailouts, something like $787 billion. Do you remember that? Remember that small amount? Now we're talking about trillions on the regular. Talking about $1 trillion bill and $1 trillion coin. And back then, it was not looking good. And now, particularly the older generation, let's say you're about to enter retirement, some of you might be listening here, those of you who've invested well into the market and into your retirement over time, The numbers are showing that, people are retiring a bit earlier. They're delaying their Social Security benefits. They're not taking those on. A lot of people are waiting until they're about 70 or about 75. And, could that be just because their investments have been doing so well? Stock market's definitely been up in the last couple months. Much better than it was March of last year. Oh, my. But it shows that there's progress. And I think, overall, we're on a good path. Things are looking way better than when I was graduating and coming out of school. They're all bushy-tailed. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for our younger generation. It's going to be a better thing for those of us who are kind of playing in the middle, still just trying to scrape by, survive, and make sure that we're going to live to see another day. So overall, I think we're probably on a better path. I see good things, labor shortages. Oh, that means there's more opportunity for you and for many other people. So I hope you guys continue tuning in here to the Big Talker. I wanted to bring on a surprise for the next segment. Our buddy TK Turbo, might have seen the name, you might have heard him in some of the other broadcasts here during the show. He's a little bit behind the curtain, the guy behind the board, and let's go ahead and bring him on. Let's have a fun segment, picking the brain of TK Turbo, the guy who's working the tools behind the station here at the Big Talker most of the time. Let's actually talk to him, bring him on air on the mic, and have a little bit of fun. We'll make management a bit a bit nervous, but TK is great. Let's have him on here in a bit. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Big Talker morning program on 106.7 FM. And welcome back to Big Talker Mornings here on 106.7 FM, broadcasting out of Wilmington, North Carolina. Another action-packed day here on the radio station. I figured we want to take a little peek behind the curtain. We don't do that too often on this program, and that's why I brought on our own little TK Turbo. He is, our tech extraordinaire at the station. He's been making the magic work. He's been pushing the buttons. Sometimes you've heard his voice interject to stop Chad or Joe at the time, but I've got him here. I was able to corral him onto the mic. TK, how's it going?
Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm not sure what it is. Your window looks dark.
It's morning.
Okay.
This is the magic of radio. So TK, you've been helping me out, getting the show out to the listeners, both online and through the tower signal. You've been working a lot of magic. You've learned a lot, sort of all the times working the board, working all the magic of the... Man, I don't even know all the devices that you touch. You got a lot of great stories. You're someone that probably deserves his own program and own show. But tell us your journey about how you ended up in the Wilmington area. I think that's a good one.
Music got me here. So I'd been working on an idea for a television show, or at least some sort of, at the time, streaming wasn't as popular as it is now. And it was about the local musicians and their music, and just capture live performances and get that out there. Another show I had was about the local restaurants, because the flavor of this place is amazing. Such amazing restaurants from one end to the other.
So it's music and food. Is
Food,
like
yeah.
Is that a beach thing, or where do you think that comes from? Because I don't know if it's a melange of culture. I don't know.
I grew up in a desert, so seafood wasn't really part of my reality as a child, but we would visit every 2 weeks, or every 2 weeks every year as a kid during summer. So 1 week would be
where did you go?
Anywhere on the beach. I mean, we had been to Myrtle Beach, we'd been to Emerald Isle, we'd been to Atlantic Beach, whatever the families, my aunts and uncles and my mom and dad would, rent a house that sleeps 16, and we'd all just go there for a week. So I guess
you like to jam out. You like to jam out. Have you played anything recently? Have you strung up? I think you're a guitar dude, bass player. What
guitar,
do,
bass. Mom had she was an opera singer and made it a point to make music important, not the instrument. So while I started on cello, I was also required to play piano, and in music camp, I learned how to play clarinet, but the understanding of the tones was what I learned in symphony. So as a guitar player and a bass player now, it's more about where I think I have an enhanced sense of where I should fit. So I'm not doubling somebody else's efforts. I can add a texture or a element as opposed to being a dominant or redundant sound. And
So you can actually read music then?
Not as well as I could when I was a kid, but I understand it more now that it's kind of like a stepping stone when reading to understand concepts, that after a while you can develop the concepts without the need for reading and writing as much. We become more visual in cases where we can actually manipulate the concepts in our minds independent of any outside external medium, memory, mnemonic. We can actually think about this, that it's not quite as tricky, I guess would be the term. So as you develop the ability to,
it's not as unintelligible, I guess.
Right. And you can communicate much like you do in English, where I say, hey, there's a blue ball over in the corner. Would you mind getting it? There are all the elements you need to work with is already there. But in music, it's representative, more like mathematics. And that's sort of, I think, the advantage to having music in education from childhood, is that you start to understand representations. Math makes sense because we're not counting apples, because I don't have any physical apples in front of me, but in my mind, I can represent these apples with a number. And the same thing is true with music, that I can't tell you, play A, C sharp, E at this time with this quarter note, but I can describe the entire passage in a language that another musician would be able to understand without necessarily writing out notes on a page. And that's sort of like charting. I learned that just playing around with other players, that, you're sitting there with a 6-pack of beer and you're not really interested in pulling out a pencil. You just want to get the music started. So you have a common conversation, start in this key and this is what we're going to do with it. And that's what
what's your favorite collaboration that you've had musically?
Wow. A friend of mine that I joined a band in Excess, which was a lot of fun. They called me up one day and said, "Hey, do you know these songs? The Dirty 30? Good. Our bass player's in jail and we need you to play tomorrow night." So sort of crash course learning. But George Paul Smith was probably the most influential co-player I've ever worked with. An amazing player, with a mostly 80s metal driven, but his understanding of what was behind it. He wasn't just flattling his fingers on the fretboard. He was actually communicating. He was interpreting not only what he heard, but what he understood was behind it. And that for me was the real magic of working with another musician that has not only the ability to communicate, but the ability to really dig in, like tearing apart a philosophy paper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like discussing Descartes, there's a number of ways you can do that, but most of it's going to be at your 101, 099 level. And then you start working with a cat.
Je pense, donc je suis.
Exactly. Right. And then you got some cat coming in and you had these, playground conversations, if you will. And then suddenly you're working with a guy who's got 500, 600 level course mentality coming in, and he's bringing really cool ideas that it's like, oh, wow. Now, we learn at the fringe of our experience, and he just brought a whole new fringe to my world. So now I'm learning by leaps and bounds. And I think that's the embodiment of the, don't be the smartest person in the room. And that,
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. It's a good mantra. It's a good mantra here on Big Talker Mornings. We're speaking with TK Turbo. We're doing a little bit of peeking behind the curtain, a little bit of the Wizard of the Oz. He's normally producing many of the shows that are here on the station, broadcasting all week long. TK, you gotta grade me how I've been doing the last couple shows, because I don't get much feedback. There are some people who will comment on the post. I'll get some emails. But you're a guy who's here, and you got your ear out there. You know what melodies are. You know what music is. How's the radio show been recently?
Oh, it's the flow, your subject, your ability.
Oh, he's cursing already, guys. Come on.
Did I? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
You scared me. So because I do think that way. It's a very solid performance, I guess, because your conversations and your understanding of the material is well researched and is part of who you are, that you can think in those terms. I can't think in political terms. It angers me. It gets my blood pressure up, and it's not something that sits well with me. But if I have an audio issue or a computer has gone down or something along those lines, I can address it, fix it, and move on. And in what you guys do, it's easier for me with the way you're producing the show because it's already here. I just add the commercials in between and go to town.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Enough with inflating my own head.
Well, I can also understand that the internet, and certainly with the way we get feedback on what we do, 90% of it, I would say, is almost a reflection or a sycophant almost type of, everybody wants to achieve and approve, and I get that, but it is hard for someone like me to be honest and say, here's how you could have done better, because it's almost always like, you're negative, you're hating. No. I'm trying to get you to a next level from where I've been working at NBC. This would not have flown. You would have already been thrown off the air. So to help you, in your case, I don't need to. Everything is so well polished. Your voice, your inflection, your material. There's not a lot of stuttering or stopping, or, it's a coherent, comprehensible, legible conversation, which is weird in radio because it's mostly one-sided, except in the case of doing interviews. But like the back 20 minutes of the show yesterday was amazing because you were able to take what you had talked about throughout the show and nest it in your idea as your take on it, that you had both, both left and right, or up and down, or red and blue, or whatever, two sides of the issue, and able to say, here's why I think this is a better argument than this one. And not a lot of people can do that.
Keep it going. No. Let's tell me your favorite sort of Wilmington memory, because you've gone to the music scenes, you've been doing, video projects, all kinds of stuff. What are some of your favorite memories that you've had in the Wilmington area?
I think the one that stands out the first is the first time I made the trip to Bald Head Island to play music. That was pretty amazing. I'd done the ferry between Fort Fisher and Carolina Beach, where you take your car on and you can feed the what are those flying rats?
Seagulls?
Yeah, those things. You can throw bread at them or whatever, and they're fun, and that's fun. But the first time I went to Bald Head Island, it did such an adventure, because it's an hour to get from where I live to Southport to get on the boat. Then you throw all your stuff in a dolly, you throw the dolly on the boat, you get on the boat, you ride the boat, you get off the boat, you take all the crap off the boat, off the dolly, put it on a tram, ride the tram across this beautiful island until you get to the gig, which is, another 10 or 15 minutes. So the entire process is counter to what I used to do as a touring rock musician, that you get into the club and everybody's like, yeah, what the hell do you want? Now it's more like, what can I get you? Right. So the other side is that I had drunk people stumbling all over my equipment and spilling beer. And now I have people that can get drunk and have a great time, and they're not acting like idiots. It's amazing. So it's the same gig. I'm getting paid the same money. I'm doing the same thing. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm carrying half the equipment or less. And I have respectable adults that are having drinks without being out of control. If that makes.
And what are the different generations like for you, since you are in the music scene a bit? Do you see big differences between the generations? I don't know how many Zoomers you interact with, but you kind of see the big difference between the millennials and all.
There seems to be. Oh yeah, this is where I would again argue for music education in our school system, is because the simplicity and banality of the music that's coming out has been less and less held to task. Like in our day, when you listen to Yes or you listen to Deep Purple or whatever, you didn't realize how ugly these people were. right? Frank Zappa, put it as like music was better when ugly people could make it. And then MTV came along and turned it into a Madonna fest or a Boy George fest, where you needed to be extreme with a gimmick of some sort, D. Snyder, et cetera, et cetera. And then you had cats that could put the two together, like David Bowie, Prince, et cetera, because they came from the old school, but they also understood entertainment like vaudevilles, theater, stage, that sort of thing. But we lost, it seems, in the lack of having music in school, that we have a critical thinking to say, this sucks, or this has some emotion to it. So when I listened to EDM, the first time I walked into a club and there were, it made no sense. It just sounded like a really loud clock. There was no musicality to it. And I think that's what's declining in parallel with our critical thinking based in reading Heinlein, reading Orwell, reading Rand. I mean, some of the Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye, Salinger. There's so many controversial books now that the entire purpose behind that book was to make you uncomfortable, to make you address your own sense of morality, mortality. What is important? What is your value system? And we can't do that anymore because it's being sold to us that if you don't have a Chanel purse, then obviously you're not of the right ilk or whatever. There's no longer a sense of, like, the whole reason why I'm in the radio station is because I don't know what's going on. So I have learned everything about the radio station by fixing everything as it broke. And we don't have kids we have kids that can't break an egg to make breakfast on their own, let alone figure out a problem that they've never experienced. And they shrink away from these challenges. And I think that's key to putting our country, I don't know about our country, but certainly our future for the cultures that don't emphasize reading, thinking, and arguing in the classic sense, where your argument and my argument are going to have a dialogue, as you do with your show, to sort of
Socratic dialogue.
Give you, which one's going to rise to the surface. We're losing that skill. And I think some of that can be enhanced, or at least certainly built on the structure of music education, because that critical thinking, that same thing of what moves you musically, can also be attributed to the same type of things that you read. What moves you when you read a story?
Look at that generational knowledge. Knowledge coming from TK Turbo.
I have to work with these kids.
You do.
I mean,
you do.
Yeah.
You got to work with this kid too, who's gonna tell you we got to go to break here. TK Turbo, thanks for coming on the program, my man, spitting some knowledge from behind the board.
I appreciate it. It's been fun.
All right, let's go to commercial, guys. I guess TK himself will log that, and we'll be right back here on The Big Talker. Stay tuned to that station. Plenty more to come. Big Talker Mornings. Big Talker 106.7 FM, 2nd of November in the year 2021. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm Yaël Ossowski here on the hosting mic. I am normally on Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on the station. I'm Deputy Director of the Consumer Choice Center and host of Consumer Choice Radio with my colleague David Clement, putting together all the latest and greatest in innovative technology and consumer choice. You've heard me on that program. You've heard me throughout this station, and it's been a fun morning. We've had some great interviews, and that last one was a doozy. Had our own TK Turbo on. I don't know why I always say little TK Turbo. He's not very little. He's actually pretty tall. But TK Turbo, who is behind-the-scenes fella here at the Big Talker station, wealth of information, this guy. Very, very knowledgeable, very smart, very engaged, very philosophic. And I thought he had some great insights. He's a man of the music. And, why not have a little individual tale about what brought somebody to Wilmington, to the area, and, point out some great spots and great memories that they've had. And, Wilmington provides that for a lot of people. It's not just that for locals who've been here for many years, but also for many people who are moving down. That's why the construction industry is booming. A lot of the services that are touring to people. We have people who are coming down from New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, Ohio, Illinois, all types of people that are moving to the Old North State, and particularly to Wilmington, because of its vicinity to the beach, no doubt, but also because of the great restaurants, the economy, the culture. There's a lot to offer in this great city of Wilmington. Every time I've been here in Wilmington, been able to hang out, been able to see friends, I've just really had a great time because there's so much you could be downtown at a restaurant. You could go get an ice cream, walk down near the harbor, and within, 10 minutes, you could be right at the beach with your toes in the sand. Can't say that for many towns and cities on the eastern seaboard, but definitely Wilmington is one place that makes you want to do it, whether you're down there at Carolina Beach or any of the other beaches, because I know there's all kinds of arguments over there on Pleasure Island about what the best places are, best beaches and the like, and plenty of them to choose from, thankfully, in this area. So that was that interview with TK. He brings up some great stories about listening to music. If you got any great suggestions, by the way, of places for music, if you're listening online to Facebook, YouTube, or anything else, go ahead and drop that in the comments. Love to know what are the areas that we can really send people when it comes to good music venues, good food venues, and really enjoying culture in Wilmington. Because I think there's a lot there. There's so much that's happening on the weekends. You can't even catch up. And hopefully you guys are able to enjoy that as much. It's not going to be good weather this weekend, unfortunately, for you guys. So that's a bit sad. That's not the best that you want to see. But it does mean that there is going to be a little bit more, inside time with your friends and family. So we're in the month of November. A lot of the holiday travel will be starting up very soon. Thanksgiving later in the month. We're going to have Christmas travel next month. And already it's starting, because we mentioned, the worker shortages in the last hour. Talking about how there aren't enough workers when it comes to the hospitality industry. Well, airlines are much the same. Airlines are much the same, and there are plenty of stories about how many flights are having to be canceled now. The airports are getting crowded. The flights are getting canceled. They're getting more packed. People are generally not going to have a good time. And there's a number of reasons for this, all kind of factors. Obviously, it has to do just with the pandemic and a lot of people that just don't have enough workers. I mean, I remember I think this is the last 4 years it's been like this, where the airlines have not had enough spare crews to recover and to be able to fully staff. So, when they get on the intercom and say, hey, their flight is delayed, sometimes it could be, mechanical. Oftentimes, though, it's just a staff thing, to where there are various labor and union rules about how long people can work and how long they can be on shift. And if they are not able to, say that they have had a break for more than 12 hours, they're not allowed to work another shift. So then the airline has to wait until the person can be brought back on, or they just don't have enough crew members, or they have too many crew members who are in Atlanta or in Tampa and not enough who are in Charlotte or in Wilmington or any other city. And it's this kind of stuff that's going to leave people stranded. It's going to be, the crowds are going to continuously expand, and we're going to have to see some kind of change here. We're going to have to see some type of difference that they're going to do here, because realistically, if we're going to have a holiday season with all of the people packing into the airport and we're not going to have, adequate flights, that's going to make things very, very troublesome. I actually remember some years ago, I was very interested in this. If you guys remember that the TSA has been around since, around 2002? Is that about right? Department of Homeland Security. And there's been a lot of debates about the TSA over the years, particularly when it comes to travel. And many of the rules are pretty ridiculous. Can't have containers over 100 milliliters. Have to be in a clear baggie. Got to take the laptop out. Oh, but if you're in the fast lane with the magnetometer, it's fine. You don't have to take your stuff out of the bag. There's all these type of things that are really troublesome when it comes to the TSA. Not to mention the pat downs and everything else. So I remember some years ago, this is sometime around the Tea Party days, so around, let's say 2010, 2011, there was supposed to be this National Opt-Out Day. You guys remember that? I think it was like November 22nd. It was like, I think the day before Thanksgiving, which is supposedly the biggest travel day of the entire year. And the idea was that if anybody was going to go through the TSA line, everybody was going to opt out and not go through the machines, the scanner machines, and instead would be patted down. And that was because of how invasive the machines were, or generally just to protest the TSA, and just how, obtrusive the whole thing is. Because anyone who's traveled a lot and has to deal with the TSA and has traveled around and been to other countries knows that the TSA is, they're not very lenient. And, they'll throw away your shampoo without a second's thought. They'll, make you go to the secondary inspection line, and you'll have to wait there forever, take off the belt, take off this, rescan the bag, and it's all because you got a power bank in there or something. You'd think these systems would be a bit more sophisticated. I don't know. This is not my expert area. But when we saw that National Opt-Out Day happened, you guys remember what happened as a result? Well, basically, instead of these scanner machines being up and ready to go, they shut them all down throughout the country. They shut down all of the machines. So instead of the kind of backscatter machines, with this whatever ray technology they have, people are just able to go through the normal metal detectors. Now, there were no, incidents as far as I know of. Nobody got hurt because something wasn't caught. But it's just hilarious to see that instead of actually facing the crowds of people who are ready to opt out on National Opt-Out Day, they just opted to turn off the machine. This is the kind of stuff that is enjoyable, and I really do like these mass movements. When they happen, it's a tiny little bit of civil disobedience, and we're having that a little bit. We've had that a little bit when it comes to the educational debates and local city council things. There's been a little bit of civil disobedience, but this kind of mass level, particularly when you're impacting a federal agency such as the TSA, it's just, that's the cherry on top, folks. That's the number one. I really think this is, it is one of the worst agencies that we have in our government. I mean, everyone has had a bad experience. Everyone has had those blue gloves turn on them at some point. And do we really still need to have the TSA? And again, you make that argument and people assume you're saying the TSA should not exist and there should be absolutely no security at the airport. That's absolutely wrong. There was a past before the TSA. And every single airport, in many airports in the world, it's just private security companies that do it, that provide the security. And if they fail, if they let through something, whether it be a bomb or a gun or explosive or something else, yeah, there's gonna be a reckoning. There's some kind of accountability. If the TSA lets something go through, and we know that they have let many things through, is there any accountability? Has anybody been fired? Have you seen anybody step down from the TSA ever? I mean, we've heard scandals about the employees and discrimination and things within, but nothing about people resigning. Nope, not at all. And it's this type of questioning of our federal agencies that I think we should do a lot more of. Because the TSA is not the most efficient way that we can actually have airport security in the year 2021. We have all the technology in the world, all the scanning. I mean, Facebook is going metaverse, guys. And we still have the same machines at the airport that we've had for the last decade and a half. What does that tell you? The price of a computer is just shooting down to the bottom. I have a computer here right beside me, a Raspberry Pi. It cost me about $30. Yet, we still have the same technology when we go to the airport scanner, thanks to the TSA. You can have the same arguments against the post office, all the innovative services that they have, and many other agencies, folks. So it's important to have competition, but also important to discuss what the alternatives could be. And I think there could be a lot of alternatives. And you'll definitely see that if you're traveling for the holidays throughout the next few weeks. Maybe you'll have a delayed flight or two because of these labor shortages. Are you feeling anxious about that? Let us know down in the comments if you're listening over there on Facebook. Otherwise, hope you guys can talk about it over there at the water cooler, because I know it's going to be a wonderful day as well. Plenty of other news for us to catch up on. You guys have been listening to Big Talker Mornings. Wonderful to have you here. I'm Yaël Ossowski at the mic. We'll be rounding out the hour in the next segment. Thank you guys for tuning in. Commercial break coming up next. Stay here, 106.7 FM. We'll be right back after this. Thank you guys for tuning back in, turning on that radio dial, streaming on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. It's Big Talker Mornings here on 106.7 FM in Wilmington, North Carolina. Yaël Ossowski back here at the mic. Normal listeners to this program, 7 to 10 a.m., are used to hearing the voice of Joe Catanacci. The Mornings with Joe Catanacci show in Big Talker is, alas, no more. Joe has moved on to WRRN in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Our loss is Myrtle Beach's gain, can we say? He's actually on a morning radio program down there around the same time, providing good analysis. We wish the best of luck to Joe. I know some of you were looking for Joe a bit earlier in the program, but the Big Talker carries on. And we've got a great number of local hosts who are on all week. And I was here yesterday, here today, at the Big Talker microphone in the virtual studio. And we're going to have Chad Adams, a owner of the Big Talker and a longtime North Carolina radio personality. He'll be taking over for the rest of the week, providing that analysis and commentary that you need for your week. And maybe providing some analysis on some of these local elections that are happening today. I know you guys keep hearing me talk about that. Will he stop talking about the local elections, please? Can't, folks. Public service. Private industry, but public service. I don't know what you call that, but that's what we're all about here at the Big Talker. So yeah, we've had great, just wrapping up the program now, since we're coming to the end of the third hour. I want to thank you guys for being patient and kind. You've held back your worst vociferous comments online in the Facebook chat or on the YouTube chat, so thank you guys for that. But I do appreciate people listening to the interviews that we were able to provide. We had a bunch of them lined up. Timing just didn't really work out. It's a bit hard to work on these schedules. We got daylight savings ending next week here on the Eastern Seaboard, so a lot of things changing. But hopefully we provided some good analysis there, and you'll continue listening to the station. The Mike Gallagher Show will be coming up next, so you guys can tune in to that. And in our closing minutes, I wanted to go over an article, and I think this is important, and it relates to the Wilmington election. It relates to the city council election. There's an article in the New York Times that I really liked. Let me snapshot that, because I don't say that very often. There is an article in the New York Times that I really liked. This is from a couple of days ago. When was this? Actually, yesterday. The demand for money behind many police traffic stops. So this has to do with traffic stops. It has to do with revenue in local communities and towns and the relationship between motorists specifically and the police. Now, I think it's important to talk about this because we have on the ballot in Wilmington and throughout the neighboring counties the question of law and order, police funding, and what we're going to do for security. And many times, those debates center around funding for police departments specifically. Oftentimes, how people are arrested, whether they should have bail. That's a conversation in California, they just kind of got rid of bail, as far as I understand, cash bail. But this article in the New York Times goes through, everybody knows it. You get pulled over, you have a busted taillight, busted headlight, busted light above your license plate, your window tint is too dark, your registration is 2 days out of date, and people get fines. Maybe they have to show up in court, but usually they just have to send a check off. And these fines can be expensive, and they can end up being $800, $1,000, $500, $200. And if you're on a disposable income and you got rent to pay and diapers to buy and food to put on the table, that can eat into your budget pretty quick. And what the New York Times article does is it goes through many different local traffic stops that have been done, some of them with African Americans who later had a confrontation with the police. And either it was because an officer misinterpreted what someone was doing in the car, or they asked them to get out, and there was some argument. Somebody ends up with a bloodied face on the pavement. I mean, this stuff happens. And violence in all of these instances, we don't know if it's warranted or not. Not all of these situations have investigations that are public. And there have been, many confrontations between unarmed civilians and the police. That's something that we are documenting. It is something that is pretty universal across all racial categories. And, there's been all kinds of debate about that. Definitely Larry Elder, if you listen to him on this station at 7 p.m. Eastern, he dives into these issues a good amount. But what this article is discussing is essentially local towns and cities have a need for revenue. Now, the way that the tax system works, and you guys know all about this, particularly if you're entrepreneurs, is you have your city funding, you have your county funding, you have your state funding. Let's keep it at that level for right now. Let's keep it baseline. So for the city, you're mostly going to make your money when it comes to the city utilities, things like water, electricity, if the city happens to own it. It's going to be things like parking, registration for various permits, restaurant licenses, and the like. But then it's also going to be tickets that are issued to motorists by the local police department. So the Wilmington City Police Department, for instance, or the Charlotte Police Department. And that money will be used to fund the budget. And as towns and cities have spent more money, look over there, look what we have here, a classic economics problem. The incentives have grown for officers to issue more fines and tickets in order to recoup the costs of the growing budgets of cities. And that means that there have been more confrontations between motorists and the police, more so than we've seen before. I mean, the other day I was actually walking down the street and saw a police woman who had one of these speed checkers on just a normal neighborhood street. And they, flag the people down and hand them a ticket right on the spot. Happened to be the end of the month, right? We've all heard this. And this is not denigrating to the police, I don't think. I think this is a demand of the way that we've structured our cities and our counties, that there's a need for revenue. Oftentimes, the sources of revenue that the city has, in some cities actually do have a municipal income tax. Most don't. Definitely half of California is like that, in New York. But if you don't have an income tax, how does the city raise money? And for too many cities and towns, it has to do with the number of fines that are levied. And it's not even just the police. It's, fines with zoning, housing inspectors. There's all types of people who issue fines and things. And that changes your relationship to, we say the state, but to the government, to your city, municipal government. And it puts pressure on officers. And then the question we have to ask is, if officers are being pushed to get more fines and to interact more with motorists, are they really doing their duty? Is this about safety? Is the license plate light about safety? Maybe if you're caught in a hit and run, you can't see the license plate of the car running away, perhaps. But if the police are concentrating on fines and levies and small things that they can do to hopefully bring in more money for the city, does that mean that we're safer? It's a big question to ask. I've had my own interactions with police in the state of North Carolina, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I think up and down the eastern seaboard. I've gone to court, I've fought, I've battled, I've won, I've lost. Were people injured? No. But this is my interaction with the police department, and everyone has had their own interactions. And it's a question that we have to ask about how we want to structure our relationship to security, to police officers, and to the funding of our towns and cities. That's why local politics matters, folks. Local engagement matters. And you have a voice in that. Today is Election Day. If you haven't gone out there, you just got a couple of hours for the rest of the day. You can really make yourself heard, both on issues of policing and security, but also education and so much more. There's so much more to come on that. I mean, just what a perfect example of civic integrity and participation. That is Election Day in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I've really enjoyed being on the radio with you guys the last 2 days. Been a whirlwind, 7 to 10 a.m. here on the Big Talker, 106.7 FM. Had some great guests on, was able to really explore some topics, at length. It's hard to do radio, folks. It's not easy. But hopefully it was entertaining and engaging. Maybe you learned something. I know I definitely did, and I was definitely able to engage with these topics a lot more and get in touch with what's happening in Wilmington and across the state and across the country and perhaps the world. So we're trying to do our best here at the Big Talker. You guys can tune in tomorrow morning, 7 to 10 a.m. We're going to have Chad Adams, who will be taking over for the rest of the week. He is an experienced radio professional, a co-owner of the Big Talker, and he'll be providing that great North Carolina analysis and news that we need. So until then, you guys, follow me on the Twitters at Yaël Oss. You can find me all over, read my articles, and listen to much more of what I'm producing in my role at the Consumer Choice Center. Until then, I bid you all adieu. Enjoy the day. Happy November 2nd. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.